Hey guys, tonight we begin with the surprisingly mundane yet oddly captivating world of camels. Those droopy-eyed desert wanderers who've somehow convinced us they're exotic, when really they spend most of their time doing absolutely nothing. While National Geographic makes them look majestic, the truth is camel life is spectacularly boring. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You spend your first week convinced that whoever designed camel legs was either drunk or had a very twisted sense of humor. These 4 impossibly long stilts attached to your body seem to have signed a separate peace treaty with gravity, one that doesn't include consulting you about their decisions. Week 1 is essentially an extended performance art piece titled, "How Many Ways Can One Small Camel Fall Over?" You discover there are more ways than you'd think possible. There's the classic forward flop, where your front legs decide they're tired and simply give up. There's the sideways stumble, which happens when you try to turn your head, and your body interprets this as a command to relocate to the ground immediately. And then there's your personal favorite, the reverse collapse, where you somehow manage to sit down without meaning to, leaving you looking like a furry, confused pretzel. The art of the camel stride, you're learning, is part swagger, part controlled falling, and entirely more complicated than it should be. Other animals seem to have figured out this whole walking business with minimal fuss. Gazelles bound, lions prowl, even the beetles seem to have a clear understanding of where their legs are supposed to go. You, meanwhile, approach each step like a diplomatic negotiation between 4 independent contractors who can't agree on a timeline. Your mother watches these early attempts with the patience of someone who's seen this exact performance several times before. Her expression suggests she's mentally calculating how long it will take you to achieve basic competence and whether she should start charging admission for the entertainment value. Other baby camels judge your walking technique with the kind of casual cruelty that comes naturally to creatures who mastered bipedal coordination sometime last Tuesday. The older juveniles gather in small groups, observing your progress with the detached interest of critics reviewing a particularly avant-garde dance performance. You can almost hear their whispered commentary. "Look at that technique. Is that supposed to be walking? My grandmother moves better than that, and she's been dead for 3 seasons." But slowly, incrementally, your legs begin to remember they're supposed to work together rather than in opposition. The secret, you discover, is to not think too hard about it. The moment you start analyzing the mechanics of placing one foot in front of the other, everything falls apart like a house of cards in a windstorm. Instead, you learn to trust that your body knows what it's doing, even when your brain is fairly certain it doesn't. Nursing, it turns out, requires athletic ability you don't yet possess, and spatial reasoning skills that are apparently still in development. Your mother's udder hangs at precisely the wrong height, too low for standing comfortably, too high for lying down efficiently. This creates a geometric puzzle that would challenge a mathematician. And you are very much not a mathematician. Your first few attempts at nursing resemble a poorly choreographed dance between 2 partners who've never met and are both slightly drunk. You approach from the wrong angle, bump into your mother's leg, stumble backward, regroup, and try again from a different direction. Your mother stands with the stolid patience of someone accustomed to dealing with incompetent customers. When you finally manage to connect with your intended target, the milk tastes like liquid comfort, mixed with subtle notes of, "Please don't fall over." It's warm and rich and carries flavors you can't identify but somehow recognize as exactly what you need. There's something in it that tastes like safety, like belonging, like the promise that despite your current incompetence, you might eventually figure out how to exist successfully in this beige and challenging world. The milk also comes with an immediate education in camel digestive architecture. You learn that your stomach has multiple compartments, like a biological filing system designed by someone who really, really likes organization. Food doesn't just go down and disappear. It gets sorted, processed, filed away for later consideration, and occasionally brought back up for additional review. This brings you to your first experience with regurgitation, which is both involuntary and apparently socially acceptable in camel culture. The first time you spit up a partially digested meal, you're mortified. You look around expecting disapproval, possibly exile from the herd. Instead, you discover that everyone else is doing it too, with the casual nonchalance of people checking their phones. It's just part of the process, like breathing or complaining about the heat. Your digestive system, you realize, is less like a simple tube and more like a complex recycling facility. Nothing gets wasted. Everything gets processed, reprocessed, and processed again until every possible nutrient has been extracted. It's efficient in the way that only evolution could design. Wasteful would mean death in a place where resources are measured in precious drops and thorny mouthfuls. The baby camel hierarchy is surprisingly complex for creatures who primarily eat thorns and haven't yet mastered the art of walking in straight lines. There are unwritten rules about who gets the shadiest spots during rest time, who gets first access to the prime nursing locations, and who gets to lead the charge toward interesting-looking rocks that might or might not be edible. Playing involves a lot of gentle bumping and confused staring. You engage in what could charitably be called games, mock battles that mostly consist of pushing against each other until someone falls over, racing competitions where the definition of winning is unclear, and group activities that seem to involve everyone walking in the same direction until someone gets distracted and wanders off. The older juveniles watch these interactions like critics at a very boring performance. They've moved beyond the basic survival skills that currently consume your attention and have graduated to more sophisticated concerns like social positioning and the development of personal style. They observe your clumsy attempts at play with the kind of benevolent condescension that comes with being 6 months older and infinitely more worldly. Learning that personal space is a human concept comes as something of a relief. In camel culture, comfort seems to be found in proximity rather than privacy. The herd moves as a loose collective, with individuals drifting closer and farther apart like planets in a very slow, very fuzzy solar system. You can rest your head on another camel's back without asking permission. You can share shade without negotiating terms. You can simply exist in the same space without anyone expecting you to make conversation or explain your presence. This communal approach to living makes sense in an environment where resources are scarce and threats are real. There's safety in numbers, warmth in proximity, and comfort in the knowledge that you're not facing the challenges of desert existence alone. The herd becomes an extended family, where everyone looks out for everyone else, partly out of genuine care and partly because individual survival depends on group success. Your first sandstorm arrives with all the subtlety of nature, deciding to rearrange the entire landscape just for fun. One moment, the world is its usual collection of beige sand, blue sky, and the occasional optimistic shrub. The next moment, the horizon disappears behind a wall of swirling dust that looks like the desert has decided to relocate itself somewhere else entirely. The storm is nature's way of exfoliating everything simultaneously. The landscape, the vegetation, any creature unfortunate enough to be caught in the open, and particularly young camels who haven't yet learned to read the signs of approaching weather drama. Sand gets into places you didn't know existed, your eyes water, your nose fills with grit, and every breath tastes like someone has been grinding rocks in your mouth. But you also learn your first practical lesson in desert survival. When the wind picks up and the air starts tasting dusty, you don't stand around admiring the meteorological phenomenon. You find shelter, you turn your back to the wind, you close your eyes, and you wait it out with the patience of someone who understands that the desert will do what the desert wants to do, regardless of your personal preferences or schedule. The sun beats down with the intensity of a cosmic heat lamp that someone has forgotten to turn off. During the hottest part of the day, the air shimmers with waves of heat that make the distant landscape look like it's melting. The sand becomes too hot to stand on comfortably, and finding shade becomes a strategic priority that governs most of your daily decisions. Learning to find shade that doesn't involve standing under another camel becomes an essential life skill. Trees are rare and usually occupied by creatures with better timing than you. Rocks provide limited relief and come with their own set of problems. They're either too hot to touch or positioned in locations that offer protection from the sun, but not from the wind. The shadow cast by a larger camel is tempting, but it comes with social complications and the risk of being stepped on by someone who outweighs you by several hundred pounds. Water becomes the holy grail, mythical, desperately needed, and apparently located somewhere beyond the next dune, always beyond the next dune. You learn to recognize the signs of approaching water sources, changes in vegetation, shifts in the behavior of other animals, subtle variations in the smell of the air, but mostly, you learn to conserve the water in your body with the efficiency of someone who understands that waste equals death. Following the herd requires basic directional skills you're still developing and an understanding of group dynamics that's more complex than it first appears. The herd doesn't move in straight lines or follow obvious paths. Instead, it flows across the landscape like water, finding the easiest route, responding to factors you can't yet identify, wind patterns, ground conditions, the collective wisdom of animals who've been making these journeys for years. Your role in this migration is to keep up and try not to wander off in pursuit of interesting-looking objects that turn out to be neither interesting nor worth the detour. The adults move with purpose and efficiency. You move with enthusiasm and frequent course corrections. Learning to read the subtle signals that indicate when the group is about to change direction becomes essential for avoiding the embarrassment of suddenly finding yourself walking alone toward nothing in particular. The ground is either too hot, too rocky, or suspiciously soft in ways that suggest hidden complications. Hot sand burns your feet and makes every step an exercise in heat management. Rocky terrain challenges your still developing coordination and threatens to turn walking into an extended stumbling exhibition. Soft sand looks welcoming but turns each step into a workout that leaves you exhausted after covering distances that should be manageable. Predators exist, though they seem more interested in easier prey than in tackling a young camel who's part of a larger group. Still, you learn to recognize the signs of potential threats. The sudden stillness that settles over the herd, the way the adults position themselves between the young and the open desert, the subtle changes in posture that signal alertness without panic. Your mother's casual competence becomes both inspiring and intimidating. She navigates the challenges of desert life with the confidence of someone who's solved these problems many times before. She finds water, locates food, identifies threats, and manages the daily requirements of survival with an efficiency that makes it all look easy. Watching her, you begin to understand that what appears to be boring routine is actually a masterclass in adaptation and survival. The gap between your current abilities and her level of competence seems impossibly wide. But you also notice that she wasn't born knowing these things. Her skills are the result of years of practice, countless small lessons learned through experience, and the accumulated wisdom that comes from successfully navigating the same challenges you're just beginning to encounter. Each day brings new lessons in the art of being a camel. Some are practical. How to find the least uncomfortable place to rest during the heat of the day, which plants are worth the effort of chewing through their thorns, how to position yourself in the herd for maximum protection and minimum social friction. Others are more subtle, reading the moods and intentions of other camels, understanding the rhythms of the desert, learning to be patient with your own slow progress toward competence. The wobble years, you're beginning to understand, are not just about learning to walk without falling over. They're about learning to exist successfully in a world that doesn't make accommodation for inexperience or uncertainty. Every stumbling step, every awkward meal, every small victory over the challenges of daily survival is preparation for the longer journey ahead. The desert is not forgiving, but it is consistent. Master its rules, and you can thrive. Ignore them, and you become a cautionary tale told around the waterholes by camels who are smart enough to pay attention during their own wobble years. Your humps emerge like small hills of stored disappointment, rising from your back with all the dignity of biological real estate that nobody particularly asked for. At first, they're barely noticeable. Little bumps that could be mistaken for muscle development, or perhaps just unfortunate posture. But gradually, week by week, they assert themselves with the persistence of unwanted houseguests who've decided to take up permanent residence. The weight distribution takes getting used to in ways that make your earlier struggles with basic walking seem quaint. You thought you had figured out the mechanics of being a camel, only to discover that someone has been secretly adding cargo to your back while you weren't paying attention. Your center of gravity shifts without warning, sending you into brief moments of confusion, where you're not entirely sure which direction constitutes forward, and which might lead to an undignified encounter with the ground. Other juveniles compare hump development with the kind of teenage-level self-consciousness that would make human adolescents proud. There are subtle evaluations happening constantly, whose humps are developing faster, who's achieving better symmetry, whose fat storage is distributed with the kind of aesthetic appeal that suggests genetic superiority. You find yourself standing in positions that show your humps to best advantage, while simultaneously trying to assess the competition without appearing too obvious about it. The social dynamics of hump comparison are surprisingly complex. Too much pride in your developing humps marks you as vain. Too little confidence suggests poor self-esteem. The goal is to project casual satisfaction with your biological architecture, while remaining modestly open to compliments and constructively dismissive of any criticism. It's a delicate balance that requires more emotional intelligence than you realized you possessed. Learning that humps are basically biological backpacks filled with emergency supplies comes as something of a revelation. These aren't just ornamental features designed to make you look distinctive at desert gatherings. They're survival equipment, portable storage units for fat that can be converted to energy when food becomes scarce and water sources dry up. Your body is essentially preparing for disasters you haven't experienced yet, packing emergency rations in advance like a very optimistic survivalist. The fat in your humps represents security, in a world where security is always temporary. During abundant times, when food is relatively plentiful and water sources are accessible, your humps swell with stored resources. During lean periods, they deflate like biological balloons, providing the energy needed to survive until conditions improve. It's a system that works beautifully in theory and adequately in practice, assuming you don't mind carrying around what essentially amounts to a portable famine survival kit. You begin to develop a personal relationship with your humps that borders on the philosophical. They're part of you, but they're also separate from you. They respond to your diet and lifestyle, but they also operate according to their own biological imperatives. You can influence their development, but you can't completely control their appearance or their timing. They're both a blessing and a burden, providing security at the cost of additional weight and complexity. The physical adaptation to carrying humps involves learning to move with grace despite having what amounts to biological luggage attached to your spine. Your walking style evolves to accommodate the shifting weight. Your sleeping positions require adjustment to account for the new topography of your back. Even simple activities like turning your head or reaching for food become exercises in spatial awareness and weight management. But gradually, incrementally, your humps stop feeling like foreign additions and start feeling like integral parts of your personal architecture. They become assets rather than complications, sources of pride rather than self-consciousness, practical features rather than cosmetic concerns. You learn to carry them with the confidence of someone who understands that what might look like excess weight is actually evidence of successful preparation for an uncertain future. Thorny bushes become your primary food group, marking the transition from the simple luxury of nursing to the complex challenge of finding your own meals in a landscape that seems designed by someone who fundamentally misunderstood the concept of hospitality. The vegetation available to you falls into two main categories: plants that are poisonous and plants that are so thoroughly armed with defensive spikes that eating them requires either exceptional courage or desperate hunger. You opt for desperate hunger because the alternative is starvation, and starvation seems less appealing than temporarily pretending you enjoy meals that fight back. The technique, such as it is, involves a three-step process: grab, chew, pretend the thorns don't hurt. The grabbing part requires careful positioning to minimize the number of spikes that penetrate your lips and gums. The chewing part involves a complex grinding motion that breaks down the plant matter, while hopefully pulverizing the thorns into manageable fragments. The pretending part is perhaps the most important, maintaining the fiction that this is normal, acceptable food rather than what it actually is, which is barely edible vegetation that seems actively hostile to being consumed. Your tongue develops the texture of leather and the sensitivity of rubber, which turns out to be exactly the kind of evolutionary adaptation needed for a diet consisting primarily of plants that would rather be left alone. The transformation is gradual but noticeable. What starts as tender tissue gradually becomes a biological tool designed for processing hostile vegetation. It's like having a built-in industrial grinder. Assuming industrial grinders were designed to taste things and occasionally complain about the working conditions. The development of tongue resilience comes with its own set of social implications. A tough tongue is a mark of maturity, evidence that you've graduated from the soft foods of childhood to the challenging cuisine of adult desert life. Other juveniles assess your tongue development with the kind of professional interest that suggests this is an important metric for evaluating overall competence and survival potential. Discovering that edible is a very relative term in desert dining comes as something of a philosophical revelation. The plants available to you would be considered inedible by most reasonable standards. They're tough, bitter, armed with defensive spikes, and generally lacking in what most creatures would consider flavor. But in the context of desert survival, edible simply means won't kill you immediately, and might provide some nutritional value if you're persistent enough. You learn to evaluate potential food sources with the pragmatic eye of someone whose options are limited, and whose survival depends on making the best of challenging circumstances. Is this plant merely unpleasant, or is it actually dangerous? Can you extract enough nutrition from it to justify the effort required to consume it? Will eating it leave you better off than you were before, or will you simply be trading hunger for a different kind of discomfort? The art of foraging involves developing preferences within a very narrow range of acceptable options. You discover that some thorny bushes have thorns that are merely annoying, while others have spikes that seem designed by someone with a personal grudge against camel mouths. Some plants have bitter flavors that fade after extended chewing, while others maintain their unpleasantness with admirable consistency. Learning to distinguish between these subtle variations becomes essential for maintaining both nutrition and morale. You also learn that timing matters in desert foraging. Plants that are merely unpleasant in the morning become actively hostile by midday, when the heat has concentrated their defensive compounds into maximum potency. Evening foraging offers the best combination of manageable temperatures and plant matter that hasn't spent the entire day brewing hostile chemicals in the desert sun. The social aspect of foraging adds another layer of complexity to what's already a challenging process. The best feeding spots are limited, and access to them involves a complex set of negotiations based on herd hierarchy, personal relationships, and the unwritten rules that govern resource sharing. Learning when to assert your right to premium foraging territory and when to accept less desirable options becomes part of the ongoing education in desert survival and social dynamics. The pecking order shifts daily based on who found the best shade, who successfully intimidated whom during the last water break, and whose humps are developing most impressively. Unlike the relatively straightforward hierarchies of childhood, teenage camel politics operate according to rules that seem to change without notice and depend on factors that aren't always obvious to casual observation. Status can rise or fall based on performance in activities that would seem trivial to outsiders, but carry significant weight in the closed social system of the herd. Successfully claiming a prime resting spot demonstrates both social awareness and practical competence. Failing to defend your position suggests weakness that other juveniles will remember and potentially exploit in future interactions. It's a system that rewards confidence while punishing overreach, encouraging assertiveness while maintaining respect for established authority. Spitting contests become a legitimate form of social interaction, serving multiple functions in the complex ecosystem of juvenile relationships. They're tests of accuracy, demonstrations of lung capacity, displays of confidence, and social bonding activities all rolled into one. The ability to project saliva with precision over meaningful distances becomes a valued skill that earns respect and establishes credibility in ways that would mystify creatures from less arid environments. The technical aspects of competitive spitting involve understanding trajectory, accounting for wind conditions, and developing the kind of oral muscle control that comes only with dedicated practice. But the social aspects are equally important. Knowing when to issue a challenge, how to accept one gracefully, and when to decline, without losing face, requires diplomatic skills that would be useful in any political system. Learning to read the subtle body language of camel disapproval becomes essential for navigating daily interactions without constantly triggering social conflicts. Camel displeasure is expressed through a complex vocabulary of ear positions, tail movements, nostril flaring, and the kind of facial expressions that somehow manage to convey profound disappointment without involving words. Missing these signals can lead to escalating tensions that result in actual confrontations, while recognizing them early allows for strategic withdrawal or diplomatic resolution. The art of camel body language involves understanding not just what the signals mean, but when they're intended as serious warnings versus casual expressions of mild irritation. A slightly flattened ear might indicate temporary annoyance that will pass if ignored, while a more pronounced ear position could signal genuine hostility that requires immediate attention and possibly strategic repositioning. Learning to calibrate your responses to the appropriate level of concern becomes crucial for maintaining social relationships and avoiding unnecessary conflicts. Your first successful intimidation of a smaller camel represents a milestone moment in your social development, the point at which you transition from being primarily intimidated by others to being capable of inspiring a certain amount of healthy respect yourself. The incident itself might be relatively minor, successfully claiming a feeding spot, defending your position in line for water, or simply standing your ground when a smaller juvenile tests your resolve. But the psychological impact is significant. Successfully asserting yourself marks the beginning of your recognition as a legitimate player in the herd's social dynamics, rather than just a participant who's still learning the rules. Other juveniles begin to factor your presence into their strategic calculations. Adults start to notice you as an individual rather than just another young camel in the general category of juveniles who require supervision. The responsibility that comes with newfound social credibility involves learning to use your influence appropriately. Intimidating smaller camels becomes less satisfying when you realize that you're now large enough to actually hurt someone who's still developing their own defensive capabilities. Understanding when to assert dominance and when to show restraint becomes part of the ongoing education in social responsibility and community leadership. Getting separated from the herd during a particularly engaging nap turns out to be one of those learning experiences that you'd prefer to acquire through theoretical instruction rather than practical demonstration. The incident begins innocently enough. A comfortable spot in the afternoon shade, the gentle rhythm of desert wind, and the kind of deep relaxation that comes after a successful morning of foraging and social navigation. You wake to discover that the landscape has become suspiciously empty of other camels. The rocks that were occupied by resting herd members are now occupied only by rocks. The shadows that provided shelter for a dozen juveniles now shelter only the gradually increasing panic of one small camel who has apparently been abandoned by everyone they've ever known. The initial response involves a systematic search of the immediate area based on the assumption that the herd couldn't have gone far and is probably just beyond the next dune or behind the next cluster of rocks. But the landscape has a way of swallowing groups of large animals with remarkable efficiency, and what seems like a logical search pattern quickly becomes a series of increasingly desperate expeditions to places where the herd definitely isn't. The psychological progression from mild concern to active worry to genuine fear happens faster than you'd expect. Being alone in the desert triggers instinctive responses that have been developing since birth. The understanding that individual survival in this environment requires either exceptional competence or exceptional luck, and you're not yet confident about possessing either in sufficient quantities. But you also discover resources you didn't know you had. Navigation skills that seemed theoretical suddenly become practical necessities. The ability to read wind patterns, track the movement of other animals, and identify the subtle signs that indicate recent camel presence transforms from academic knowledge to survival tools. The fear provides motivation, but the skills provide hope. Your first encounter with humans represents a collision between two entirely different approaches to desert existence. The humans are tall, noisy, and inexplicably bipedal. Creatures who've somehow decided that walking on only two legs is a reasonable approach to locomotion, and that covering their skin with artificial materials is preferable to developing natural protection against sun and sand. They travel in what appears to be a mechanical herd, moving across the landscape in vehicles that seem designed by someone who fundamentally misunderstood the concepts of efficiency and silence. The noise they generate would alert every predator and prey animal within several miles to their presence, which suggests either remarkable confidence in their defensive capabilities or a serious lack of understanding about desert survival principles. The humans show interest in you that seems both curious and potentially problematic. They point in your direction and make sounds that might be communication attempts, or might just be expressions of surprise at encountering a juvenile camel without obvious adult supervision. Their behavior suggests they understand that finding a young camel alone in the desert represents some kind of unusual situation, though their proposed solutions involve approaches that seem unlikely to address the core problem of reuniting you with your herd. A close call with a desert fox, who seemed more curious than hungry, provides an educational experience in threat assessment and the management of interspecies relations. The fox approaches with the kind of casual confidence that suggests either remarkable courage or a serious miscalculation about the relative size and defensive capabilities of juvenile camels versus adult foxes. The encounter unfolds as a series of cautious mutual evaluations. The fox maintains a respectful distance while clearly assessing whether you represent a potential meal, a potential threat, or simply an unusual addition to the landscape that deserves investigation. You try to project an image of competence and confidence, while internally debating whether a fox of this size could actually pose a serious threat to a camel of your size, or whether this is simply an educational opportunity disguised as a potentially dangerous situation. The fox's eventual retreat suggests that you successfully communicated your lack of interest in becoming prey, possibly through a combination of size advantage, defensive posturing, and the kind of direct eye contact that indicates a willingness to escalate the situation if necessary. The incident provides valuable experience in recognizing and responding to potential threats while building confidence in your own defensive capabilities. The day you discovered you could run, sort of, if properly motivated, marks an important milestone in your physical development and your understanding of your own capabilities. The motivation comes in the form of a situation that requires rapid relocation, perhaps the unexpected appearance of a larger predator, a sudden weather change, or simply the distant sight of your herd moving in a direction that suggests immediate departure is advisable. Running, as it turns out, is significantly different from walking, requiring coordination skills that build on but extend well beyond basic locomotion. The challenge involves maintaining balance while moving at increased speed, coordinating the movement of four legs in a rhythm that's faster and more complex than normal walking, and doing all of this while navigating terrain that may not be ideally suited for high-speed camel travel. Your first attempts at running involve more enthusiasm than technique, resulting in a gait that could charitably be described as controlled, stumbling at increased velocity. But the motivation provided by necessity accelerates the learning process significantly. Fear, it turns out, is an excellent teacher when it comes to physical skills that have immediate survival applications. Summer heat that makes you question the life choices of your ancestors arrives with the kind of intensity that transforms the desert from merely challenging to actively hostile. The sun becomes less a source of light and warmth and more a cosmic furnace that seems determined to test the limits of camel heat tolerance. The air shimmers with thermal waves that make the landscape appear to be melting, and the sand becomes too hot for extended contact with unprotected skin. The heat forces adaptations in daily routines that would seem extreme to creatures from more temperate environments. Activity becomes concentrated in the early morning and late evening hours, when temperatures drop from life-threatening to merely extremely uncomfortable. The middle of the day becomes a time for finding whatever shade is available and waiting for the sun to remember that moderation is a virtue. You develop a personal relationship with heat that involves both respect and resentment. Respect for its power to transform a manageable environment into a survival challenge, and resentment for the way it limits your freedom to move and feed according to your preferences rather than thermal necessities. Learning to work with, rather than against the heat, becomes an essential life skill that influences every aspect of daily existence. The psychological impact of extreme heat involves a kind of temporal compression, where the hot season feels endless while you're experiencing it, but passes quickly in memory once it's over. Days blend together in a haze of heat management and survival routine. The challenge becomes not just enduring the heat, but maintaining morale and social connections when everyone is focused primarily on basic survival. Brief winter brings relief and confusion in equal measure, transforming the familiar landscape into something that feels like a different planet entirely. Temperatures that seemed impossible after months of extreme heat suddenly become the new normal. The desert that spent months trying to kill you with heat suddenly seems almost hospitable, offering cool mornings and comfortable evenings that feel like gifts from a more benevolent universe. But winter also brings its own challenges. The cold requires different survival strategies: huddling for warmth, finding shelter from wind, adjusting feeding schedules to account for increased caloric needs. Your body, which had adapted so carefully to heat management, now needs to readjust to an entirely different set of environmental demands. The confusion comes from the realization that the desert is not a stable environment, but a constantly changing system that requires continuous adaptation. Just when you think you've mastered the skills needed for survival, the conditions change and demand a new set of competencies. It's humbling and educational in equal measure. Rain becomes a mythical event, celebrated like a small miracle when it finally arrives after months or sometimes years of absence. The first drops are greeted with a combination of disbelief and joy that seems disproportionate, until you understand how precious water becomes in an environment where it's always scarce and often completely unavailable. The transformation that rain brings to the desert landscape is immediate and dramatic. Plants that seemed dead suddenly burst into bloom. The air fills with scents that have been dormant for months. Colors appear that you'd forgotten existed. The entire ecosystem responds to the water with an enthusiasm that suggests it's been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. Learning that weather is just the desert's way of keeping things interesting becomes part of your philosophical education in accepting conditions you can't control while adapting to circumstances you didn't choose. The desert doesn't provide weather for your convenience or comfort. It operates according to larger patterns that individual camels must accommodate rather than direct. Navigation by landmarks that all look suspiciously similar represents one of the more challenging aspects of desert education. The landscape seems designed by someone with a very limited imagination. Endless variations on the theme of sand, rocks, and occasional sparse vegetation. Learning to distinguish between dunes that look identical to casual observation requires developing the kind of attention to detail that borders on obsessive. You learn to notice subtle differences in rock formations, variations in sand, color and texture, the way shadows fall at different times of day, and the growth patterns of vegetation that might indicate underground water sources or wind patterns. Navigation becomes less about obvious landmarks and more about reading the accumulated evidence of geological and meteorological processes that have shaped the environment over time. The art of efficient chewing evolves from the basic survival skill of consuming hostile vegetation to a sophisticated process of extracting maximum nutritional value from minimal resources. More processing, less effort becomes the governing principle, developing techniques that break down plant matter more completely while requiring less energy expenditure. This involves understanding the optimal chewing rhythm for different types of vegetation, learning when to invest energy in thorough processing versus when to consume quickly and move on to better food sources, and developing jaw strength and coordination that allows for extended periods of challenging mastication without fatigue or injury. Social grooming becomes a valuable currency in herd economics, serving functions that extend well beyond basic hygiene. Grooming relationships establish and maintain social bonds, provide opportunities for peaceful interaction, and create networks of mutual support that can be crucial during stressful situations. Learning to give and receive grooming appropriately involves understanding the social protocols that govern these interactions. Who can groom whom, when grooming is welcome versus intrusive, and how to use grooming opportunities to build and maintain relationships that support your position in the herd's social structure. Developing your personal spitting style and accuracy becomes both a practical skill and a form of artistic expression. The practical applications involve defensive capabilities and competitive social interactions. The artistic aspects involve developing a technique that's both effective and distinctively your own, a signature style that other camels can recognize and respect. The technical aspects of advanced spitting involve understanding aerodynamics, developing oral muscle control, and practicing regularly under various conditions to maintain accuracy and range. But the social aspects are equally important, knowing when to demonstrate your capabilities and when to keep them in reserve, understanding the etiquette of spitting competitions, and using your skills to build rather than damage relationships within the herd. Each of these developing skills contributes to your overall competence as a desert survivor and your credibility as a member of the camel community. The awkward years are ultimately about the transition from dependence to independence, from following others to making your own decisions, from consuming resources to contributing to the group's collective wisdom and survival capabilities. The challenges are real and sometimes dangerous, but they're also opportunities to discover capabilities you didn't know you possessed, and to develop the confidence that comes from successfully navigating difficult situations. The awkwardness is temporary, but the skills and confidence you develop during this phase provide the foundation for everything that follows in your desert life. You've achieved the camel equivalent of graduating college. You can find food and water without dying, which represents a significant improvement over your earlier approach to survival, which mostly involved hoping that someone else would handle the difficult parts while you focused on not falling over. The transition from barely competent juvenile to adequately functional young adult happens gradually, then all at once, like sunrise in the desert, a slow progression of barely perceptible changes that suddenly resolves into full daylight and the realization that you've somehow become the kind of camel who knows things. The knowledge feels both earned and accidental. You remember being confused by basic survival requirements that now seem obvious, struggling with challenges that have become routine, and feeling overwhelmed by responsibilities that you now handle without conscious thought. But you can't pinpoint exactly when the transition occurred. One day you were following others and hoping for the best, and the next day you were making decisions based on confidence rather than fear. Your humps have filled out nicely, earning approving nods from elders who remember when you were a wobbling mess of legs and uncertainty. The biological architecture that once felt like an awkward burden has transformed into a source of pride and practical advantage. Your humps are now properly proportioned, well distributed, and substantial enough to suggest that you've mastered the art of converting limited resources into stored energy. They represent competence made visible, evidence that you understand how to thrive rather than merely survive. The approval of elders carries weight that you're only beginning to understand. These are camels who've seen multiple generations of juveniles struggle through the learning process, many of whom didn't make it to successful adulthood. Their nods of recognition aren't casual social pleasantries. They're professional assessments from experts who know the difference between real competence and convincing performance. Being acknowledged by animals who've survived decades in one of the world's most challenging environments feels like receiving a diploma from the University of Desert Life. The awkward stumbling that once characterized your approach to basic locomotion has evolved into a confident saunter that suggests you know where you're going and expect to arrive there successfully. Your gait has developed personality, a distinctive rhythm that other camels can recognize from a distance. You move with purpose rather than hope, efficiency rather than enthusiasm, and the kind of casual competence that makes difficult terrain look manageable. The development of personal walking style represents more than just improved coordination. It's a form of non-verbal communication that broadcasts information about your confidence, health, social status, and general approach to life. A confident saunter indicates that you've mastered the basic challenges of desert existence and are ready to take on more complex responsibilities. It's a walking advertisement for your competence that influences how other camels interact with you and what kinds of opportunities they offer you. Other camels begin to notice you exist, which represents significant progress from your earlier status as that juvenile who might eventually figure things out if given enough time and supervision. Recognition as an individual rather than just a member of the general category. Young camels marks the beginning of your transition from follower to potential leader, from resource consumer to resource contributor, from someone who requires guidance to someone who might eventually provide it. The shift in social recognition happens in subtle ways that accumulate over time. Older camels begin including you in conversations rather than talking around you. Your opinions are sought on matters that were previously handled without consulting juveniles. You're given responsibilities that require judgment rather than just following instructions. Other camels begin positioning themselves near you during rest periods, suggesting that your presence is considered an asset rather than a liability. But recognition also brings expectations that can feel overwhelming when you're still getting accustomed to your own competence. Being noticed means being evaluated continuously, having your decisions scrutinized by animals who've earned the right to have opinions about desert survival. Success is expected rather than celebrated, and failure carries consequences that extend beyond personal embarrassment to potential impact on the welfare of others who've come to rely on your judgment. The psychological transition from invisible juvenile to recognized adult involves learning to trust your own instincts while remaining open to guidance from more experienced animals. It's a delicate balance between confidence and humility, between asserting your competence and acknowledging your limitations. The goal is to project reliability without arrogance, capability without overreach, and leadership potential without presumption. You begin to understand that adult competence isn't about knowing everything. It's about knowing what you don't know, and having reliable strategies for acquiring necessary information quickly. The elders who command the most respect aren't necessarily the ones with the most knowledge, but the ones with the best judgment about when to act on limited information and when to wait for better data. They've learned to make good decisions under pressure while accepting responsibility for the consequences. Finding your place in the herd hierarchy requires careful observation and strategic positioning that would make a corporate consultant proud. The social structure of the herd operates according to rules that are both ancient and constantly evolving, based on factors that include age, experience, family connections, personal competence, recent performance, and subtle personality dynamics that can shift the balance of power in ways that aren't immediately obvious to casual observers. The hierarchy isn't a simple ladder where everyone knows their exact position relative to everyone else. It's more like a complex web of relationships where influence flows in multiple directions depending on circumstances, subject matter expertise, and the current state of various personal alliances. Your position relative to any other individual might vary based on whether you're discussing water sources, navigation routes, social protocols, or feeding strategies. Learning when to assert yourself and when to blend into the background becomes a crucial skill that determines both your survival prospects and your potential for advancement within the group's social structure. Assertion at the wrong time can trigger conflicts that damage your reputation and relationships. Failure to assert yourself when appropriate can result in missed opportunities and gradual loss of status. The timing requires reading subtle social cues and understanding the complex dynamics that govern group decision-making. The art of strategic assertion involves choosing your battles carefully, building coalitions before challenging established authority, and ensuring that your challenges are based on genuine competence rather than ego or ambition. Successful assertion requires offering better alternatives rather than just criticism, demonstrating your qualifications through performance rather than claims, and maintaining respect for the animals you're challenging even when you disagree with their decisions. Blending into the background is equally important and significantly more complex than simply staying quiet and avoiding attention. It requires understanding when your input isn't needed, when your presence might complicate delicate negotiations, and when supporting others' leadership serves your long-term interests better than promoting your own agenda. Strategic invisibility allows you to observe and learn without interfering, gather information without appearing to spy, and avoid responsibility for decisions that might have negative consequences. The complex dance of camel social dynamics operates like a combination of ballet and wrestling match, graceful and choreographed when everyone understands their roles, but capable of turning physical when conflicts escalate beyond the boundaries of polite disagreement. Most social interactions proceed according to established protocols that allow for competition and conflict resolution without serious violence, but the threat of escalation provides the enforcement mechanism that makes the subtle rules meaningful. Understanding the choreography of social interaction requires learning to read body language with the precision of a linguist decoding ancient texts. Ear positions convey information about attention and intention. Tail movements indicate levels of stress and aggression. Nostril flaring suggests emotional states that might require diplomatic intervention. The ability to interpret and respond appropriately to these signals determines whether interactions proceed smoothly or escalate into confrontations that can damage relationships and disrupt group harmony. Earning respect through consistent mediocrity and reliable presence might sound like an underwhelming career strategy, but in the context of desert survival, reliability often trumps brilliance. The desert doesn't reward spectacular individual performance as much as it punishes unreliable group members. A camel who consistently makes good decisions under pressure is more valuable than one who occasionally makes brilliant decisions but can't be counted on during routine challenges. The respect that comes from reliability is different from the admiration that follows exceptional performance. It's deeper, more stable, and more likely to translate into real influence during critical situations. When the herd faces genuine dangers or difficult decisions, the animals who get consulted are those with track records of consistent good judgment, rather than those known for dramatic gestures or exceptional individual achievements. Building a reputation for reliability requires performing consistently over extended periods, while avoiding the kind of spectacular failures that overshadow years of competent service. It means being present when needed, contributing appropriately to group efforts, and maintaining high standards even when no one is watching. The goal is to become the kind of camel that others naturally think of when they need someone dependable to handle important responsibilities. The social dynamics also involve understanding the difference between leadership that's imposed and leadership that's earned through respect and competence. Imposed leadership relies on size, aggression, or social connections to maintain authority. Earned leadership is based on demonstrated competence and the voluntary deference of animals who've learned to trust your judgment. The latter is more stable and effective, but it requires consistently proving your worth rather than simply asserting your authority. Your emerging social position also involves learning to navigate the complex relationships between different generations within the herd. Elders possess knowledge and experience that can be crucial for survival, but they may be resistant to new approaches or slow to adapt to changing conditions. Contemporaries offer partnership opportunities and potential alliances, but they're also your primary competition for advancement opportunities. Younger animals represent potential followers and future resources, but they require investment of time and energy that might not provide immediate returns. The mating season arrives with all the subtlety of a freight train, carrying a cargo of awkwardness and barely contained biological urges. What was previously a relatively peaceful social environment suddenly transforms into something resembling a combination of a dating show, a wrestling competition, and a performance art festival where everyone has forgotten the script but remains committed to the general concept of making an impression. The seasonal transformation affects every aspect of herd dynamics, turning normally rational animals into creatures driven by reproductive imperatives that override their usual priorities of survival, social harmony, and personal dignity. Feeding schedules become secondary to courtship displays. Water conservation takes a back seat to grooming and preening. Navigation routes get modified to accommodate the complex logistics of romantic competition and mate selection. Male camels become temporarily insufferable, inflating neck sacs like biological balloons, while engaging in behavior that would be considered ridiculous under any other circumstances, but somehow becomes socially acceptable during the brief window when reproductive success justifies temporary abandonment of normal behavioral standards. The transformation is both dramatic and slightly horrifying to observe. Normally competent animals suddenly dedicating enormous amounts of energy to activities that serve no obvious survival purpose, beyond the biological imperative to pass on their genetic material. The neck sac inflation represents the camel equivalent of flexing, peacock tail displays, and expensive sports cars all rolled into one biological phenomenon. The inflated sacks serve no practical purpose beyond advertising reproductive fitness and intimidating rival males. They're essentially biological billboards that announce, "I am healthy enough to waste energy on completely non-functional anatomical features," which suggests that my genes might be worth perpetuating. The sight of adult males wandering around with inflated neck sacks creates a social dynamic that falls somewhere between amusing and embarrassing for everyone involved. The males carrying these biological advertisements seem convinced that they look impressive and attractive. Other males view them as competition that needs to be discouraged through various forms of posturing and intimidation. Females observe the entire spectacle with the kind of detached interest normally reserved for evaluating livestock at a market. The politics of attraction involve dominance displays that mostly involve looking ridiculous while pretending to be impressive. Males engage in elaborate competitions that test strength, endurance, and tolerance for public humiliation. They wrestle with each other in contests that determine access to mating opportunities. They make loud vocalizations that serve no apparent purpose beyond announcing their presence to every predator within several miles. They engage in elaborate grooming rituals that consume enormous amounts of time and energy. These displays create a complex social hierarchy based on reproductive competition rather than survival competence. Animals who are normally respected for their practical skills suddenly find themselves evaluated according to entirely different criteria. Success in mating competition doesn't necessarily correlate with leadership ability, survival skills, or any of the other qualities that matter during the rest of the year. This creates temporary social disruption that can complicate group decision-making and resource allocation. Learning that love in the desert is complicated by limited options and harsh realities provides a practical education in the difference between romantic idealism and biological pragmatism. The pool of potential mates is limited by geography, social connections, and genetic compatibility requirements that rule out close relatives. The harsh environment means that reproductive success depends on finding partners who combine genetic fitness with practical survival skills. The romantic complications are multiplied by the reality that successful reproduction requires not just finding a suitable mate, but also timing conception to coincide with environmental conditions that support successful pregnancy and early childhood development. Too early, and the offspring arrive during harsh weather conditions that threaten survival. Too late, and they miss the optimal window for growth and development before the next challenging season arrives. The courtship process itself requires navigating social protocols that balance individual choice with group stability. Successful pair formation needs to avoid creating conflicts that could disrupt herd harmony or damage important relationships. The politics of mate selection involve considering not just personal compatibility, but also the impact of reproductive partnerships on social dynamics, resource allocation, and group leadership structures. For females, the mate selection process involves evaluating potential partners based on criteria that extend beyond immediate attractiveness to include long-term prospects for offspring survival and social advancement. A male who's impressive during courtship displays might not be reliable for long-term partnership and parental responsibilities. The challenge is identifying animals who combine short-term reproductive fitness with long-term partnership potential. The seasonal nature of mating creates concentrated periods of intense social drama, followed by extended periods of relative calm. During mating season, romantic relationships dominate social dynamics and influence most group decisions. Outside of mating season, these relationships become less prominent, and social dynamics return to being primarily organized around survival challenges and practical cooperation. Your own role in this romantic theater depends on your age, social status, and personal interest in participating in reproductive activities. As a young adult, you're old enough to be considered a potential participant, but young enough that your lack of experience puts you at a disadvantage relative to more established animals. Learning to navigate mating season involves understanding when to compete actively and when to observe and learn for future opportunities. The educational value of observing mating season extends beyond romantic relationships to include lessons in competition, negotiation, social dynamics, and resource management. The strategies that work for reproductive success often apply to other forms of competition and advancement. The social skills required for successful courtship translate into other situations requiring diplomacy, persuasion, and relationship management. You can now predict weather changes by the behavior of your joints with the accuracy of a meteorologist who's been personally invested in forecasting accuracy by having to live with the consequences of being wrong. Your knees have become biological barometers that announce approaching sandstorms hours before they appear on the horizon. Your shoulders predict temperature changes with the reliability of expensive scientific instruments. Your hip joints provide early warning systems for atmospheric pressure variations that precede significant weather events. This biological weather prediction system develops gradually as your body accumulates experience with the correlation between atmospheric conditions and physical comfort. The cartilage in your joints responds to humidity changes, barometric pressure variations, and temperature fluctuations in ways that create predictable patterns of stiffness, flexibility, and discomfort. Learning to interpret these signals accurately requires years of experience and careful attention to the relationship between physical sensations and subsequent weather developments. The practical value of joint-based weather prediction extends beyond satisfying curiosity about upcoming conditions to providing crucial information for survival planning. Knowing that a sandstorm will arrive in 6 hours allows time to find adequate shelter, secure food sources, and position the herd in locations that provide maximum protection from wind and blown sand. Predicting temperature extremes allows for advanced preparation through behavioral modifications that improve comfort and survival prospects. Water conservation becomes an art form worthy of desert monks who've dedicated their lives to achieving perfect efficiency in resource utilization. Your body's water management system operates with precision that would impress engineers designing life support systems for space travel. Every drop is recycled, reprocessed, and conserved through biological mechanisms that extract maximum utility from minimal resources. The physiological adaptations for water conservation involve multiple organ systems working in coordinated harmony to minimize water loss while maintaining essential bodily functions. Your kidneys process waste products using minimal water, concentrating urine to levels that would be toxic in animals adapted to water-rich environments. Your respiratory system recovers moisture from exhaled air through specialized nasal passages that function like biological dehumidifiers. Your behavioral water conservation strategies complement the physiological adaptations through lifestyle modifications that reduce water requirements while maximizing the efficiency of water intake. You learn to time drinking to coincide with optimal absorption conditions, modify activity levels to reduce water loss through perspiration, and select food sources based partly on their water content and the water cost of processing them. The psychological aspects of water conservation involve developing a relationship with scarcity that transforms limitation into appreciation rather than resentment. Water becomes precious rather than merely necessary, special rather than routine, worthy of careful consideration rather than casual consumption. This shift in perspective helps maintain morale during periods of genuine scarcity while encouraging the kind of mindful consumption that extends available resources. Navigation skills improve to the point where you rarely end up walking in circles, which represents a significant advancement over your earlier approach to desert travel, which mostly involved optimistic wandering in approximately the right direction, while hoping that someone else was keeping track of important details like destination and route planning. Your internal compass has been calibrated through experience and refined through trial and error into a reliable guidance system. The development of advanced navigation abilities involves learning to read multiple environmental indicators simultaneously and integrate them into coherent spatial awareness. Wind patterns provide information about direction and weather systems. Star positions offer reliable reference points for nighttime travel. Geological formations create landmarks that remain stable over long periods. Vegetation patterns indicate water sources and seasonal changes that affect route planning. Your navigation skills also include understanding the difference between theoretical knowledge of direction and practical route planning that accounts for terrain challenges, resource availability, and group logistics. Knowing where you want to go is only the beginning. Successful navigation requires plotting courses that account for the capabilities and limitations of your traveling companions, the availability of food and water along the route, and contingency planning for unexpected obstacles or weather changes. The ability to find edible plants in a landscape that seems designed to discourage eating develops into something approaching expertise in hostile environment foraging. You can now identify dozens of plant species based on appearance, seasonal availability, nutritional value, and processing requirements. Your botanical knowledge extends beyond simple identification to include understanding of optimal harvesting techniques, preparation methods, and consumption strategies that maximize nutritional benefit while minimizing risk. The advanced foraging skills involve understanding plant biology well enough to predict where different species are likely to grow based on soil conditions, water availability, seasonal patterns, and microclimate variations. You can assess the nutritional value of potential food sources based on visual inspection and make informed decisions about whether the energy required to harvest and process them justifies the nutritional return on investment. Your foraging expertise also includes understanding the ecological relationships between different plant and animal species that affect food availability and safety. Certain plants are more palatable and nutritious when eaten in combination with others. Some plants are safe only during specific seasons or growth stages. Understanding these relationships allows for more sophisticated meal planning that improves both nutrition and safety. The seasonal aspects of foraging require maintaining awareness of how plant availability and nutritional content change throughout the year. Plants that are abundant and nutritious during one season may become scarce or even toxic during others. Successful foraging involves planning ahead for seasonal changes, identifying alternative food sources before they're needed, and understanding how to modify foraging strategies based on environmental conditions. Your first time leading a small group to water represents a transition from follower to leader that's both terrifying and empowering, like being handed the keys to an aircraft while everyone assumes you know how to fly. The responsibility weighs more heavily than you expected. Not just the physical challenge of finding water in a landscape where it's always scarce and often completely hidden, but the psychological burden of having other animals depend on your judgment in a situation where mistakes can have life or death consequences. The group that follows you consists of younger animals who've observed your competence during routine activities and concluded that you possess the knowledge and judgment needed to guide them successfully to resources they can't locate independently. Their confidence in your abilities is both flattering and intimidating. Flattering because it represents recognition of your development into a capable adult, intimidating because their survival depends on your performance meeting their expectations. The route to water requires navigation skills that extend beyond simple direction finding to include understanding of seasonal variations in water availability, recognition of environmental indicators that suggest hidden water sources, and judgment about which potential sources are worth investigating versus which are likely to be dry or contaminated. The decision-making process involves weighing incomplete information while managing the time pressure created by the group's increasing thirst and the limited daylight available for travel. The psychological dynamics of leadership during the water expedition involve maintaining confidence and decisiveness while internally dealing with uncertainty and self-doubt. The younger animals look to you for reassurance and guidance, expecting you to project competence even when you're not entirely sure about the best course of action. Learning to make decisions based on limited information while accepting responsibility for the consequences becomes a crucial leadership skill. The successful completion of the water expedition provides validation of your leadership capabilities while teaching important lessons about the responsibilities that come with being trusted by others. The relief and gratitude of the animals who followed you create a sense of accomplishment that goes beyond personal achievement to include the satisfaction of contributing to the welfare of the community. Dealing with younger camels who ask obvious questions and challenge your patience becomes a regular part of your emerging leadership role, requiring diplomatic skills that balance education with efficiency, patience with authority, and mentorship with practical time management. The younger animals haven't yet developed the experience base that makes certain survival strategies seem obvious, so their questions often focus on issues that you now consider basic knowledge. The challenge of answering obvious questions lies in providing useful information without appearing condescending or impatient, while also managing your time and energy efficiently enough to handle your own responsibilities. The younger animals deserve helpful responses that support their learning and development, but they also need to understand that your availability for instruction is limited by practical survival requirements. Learning to teach effectively requires understanding different learning styles and adapting your instruction methods to match the needs and capabilities of individual students. Some younger animals learn best through direct instruction and clear explanations. Others benefit more from observation opportunities and guided practice. Some need patient repetition of basic concepts, while others grasp new information quickly but need help understanding how to apply it in practical situations. The patience required for effective mentorship extends beyond simply answering questions to include providing emotional support and encouragement during the learning process. Younger animals often struggle with confidence issues that affect their performance and decision-making abilities. Part of your leadership role involves helping them develop the self-assurance needed for independent survival, while avoiding the overconfidence that can lead to dangerous mistakes. Learning that authority comes with the responsibility of knowing where you're going applies both literally and metaphorically to your development as a leader within the herd's social structure. Literally, animals who follow you expect that you have reliable knowledge of routes, destinations, and navigation strategies that will lead to successful outcomes. Metaphorically, leadership requires having clear goals and practical strategies for achieving them. The responsibility of leadership extends beyond personal accountability to include consideration of how your decisions affect others who've chosen to trust your judgment. Mistakes that might be acceptable when they only affect your own welfare become much more serious when they impact the safety and survival of animals who've placed their confidence in your abilities. The gradual realization that you've become someone others follow happens incrementally through small interactions and minor leadership opportunities that accumulate over time into a pattern of responsibility and influence. The recognition comes not through formal appointment or dramatic moments, but through the quiet acknowledgement that other animals naturally turn to you for guidance and decision-making support. This emerging leadership role requires developing skills that extend beyond technical competence to include communication, diplomacy, conflict resolution, and resource management. Leading effectively involves understanding group dynamics, managing different personalities and agendas, and making decisions that balance individual needs with group welfare. The transition to leadership also involves learning to accept the isolation that comes with responsibility and authority. Leaders often need to make unpopular decisions based on information that followers don't have access to. The burden of leadership includes carrying knowledge about risks and challenges that would create unnecessary anxiety if shared widely, while maintaining confidence and optimism that support group morale. Meeting other camel herds creates social situations that resemble family reunions, with more spitting and significantly higher stakes for territorial negotiations and resource-sharing agreements. These encounters represent rare opportunities for social interaction beyond your immediate group, but they also bring challenges related to establishing relative status, negotiating access to shared resources, and managing potential conflicts between animals who don't share established social relationships or mutual understanding of behavioral expectations. The initial approach between different herds follows protocols that balance curiosity with caution, hospitality with defensiveness, and social opportunity with security concerns. The lead animals from each group engage in formal greeting rituals that establish the relative size, health, and competence of each herd, while avoiding direct confrontation that could escalate into actual conflict. These diplomatic exchanges set the tone for subsequent interactions and determine whether the encounter will be beneficial or problematic for both groups. The social dynamics of inter-herd meetings involve complex negotiations about resource sharing, territorial boundaries, and behavioral standards that will govern the temporary coexistence of animals who don't normally interact. Water sources, feeding areas, and resting locations need to be allocated fairly while avoiding conflicts that could damage relationships or trigger aggressive confrontations. The negotiations require diplomatic skills from experienced animals who understand both the importance of maintaining good relationships with other herds and the necessity of protecting their own group's interests. Individual interactions during these meetings provide opportunities for social learning, information exchange, and personal relationship building that can have long-term benefits for both groups. Younger animals learn about different approaches to common challenges by observing how other herds handle survival strategies, social organization, and leadership structures. Adults share information about resource locations, seasonal changes, and environmental challenges that can improve survival prospects for all participants. The romantic possibilities created by inter-herd meetings add another layer of complexity to these social encounters, offering opportunities for genetic diversity and pair formation, while creating potential sources of conflict and social disruption. Animals who form attachments to members of other herds face difficult decisions about whether to leave their birth group, to join new partners, or maintain existing social relationships at the cost of romantic opportunities. Human settlements on the horizon represent sources of curiosity and occasional opportunities that come with significant risks, and ethical complexities that challenge your understanding of appropriate relationship boundaries between different species. The settlements appear as geometric disruptions in the natural landscape, straight lines and right angles that stand out against the organic curves and random distributions of natural formations. The humans who create these settlements operate according to principles that seem to contradict most of what you understand about efficient desert survival. They consume enormous quantities of water for purposes that don't appear to be directly related to survival. They modify the natural environment in ways that seem to reduce rather than improve its capacity to support life. They engage in activities that generate noise and waste products that serve no obvious survival function. But the settlements also represent resources that can sometimes be accessed without direct confrontation or dangerous interaction with humans. Water sources created for human use occasionally overflow or leak in ways that provide drinking opportunities for wildlife. Vegetation planted around human settlements sometimes includes plants that are edible and more abundant than natural food sources. Waste products from human activities occasionally include materials that can be useful for animals with less particular standards about food quality and origin. The ethical complexities of interacting with human settlements involve understanding the difference between opportunistic resource use and theft, between harmless observation and problematic interference, and between beneficial coexistence and dangerous dependence. Learning to assess when human resources can be safely utilized requires understanding human behavior patterns, security measures, and the likely consequences of different types of interaction. Wildlife interactions range from boring to mildly concerning, providing ongoing education in threat assessment, interspecies communication, and ecological relationship management that contributes to your understanding of the complex web of relationships that characterize desert ecosystems. Most wildlife encounters are routine and unremarkable, brief observations of animals going about their own survival activities without particular interest in interacting with camels. The boring interactions include routine encounters with herbivores who share similar habitat requirements but don't compete directly for resources, scavengers who clean up after predator kills and camel waste, and various small mammals and reptiles whose activities intersect with camel life without creating significant opportunities or challenges. These encounters provide ongoing education in species identification and behavior patterns that contribute to general ecological awareness. The mildly concerning interactions involve potential competitors for resources, predators who might pose threats under certain circumstances, and animals whose behavior suggests territorial disputes or aggressive tendencies that require careful management to avoid escalation into actual conflict. Learning to assess and respond appropriately to these situations requires understanding animal behavior, threat evaluation, and de-escalation strategies. The ongoing relationship with the landscape shapes every day through subtle interactions and gradual changes that accumulate over time into profound influences on your physical development, behavioral patterns, and psychological relationship with your environment. The landscape is both stage and actor in the drama of desert survival, providing the context for all activities while actively participating in ways that determine success or failure of survival strategies. The seasonal changes in landscape appearance and resource availability require constant adaptation of survival strategies, social behaviors, and group movements that keep pace with environmental variations. The landscape that provides abundant resources during favorable seasons becomes challenging and potentially dangerous during harsh periods. Learning to read these changes and adapt appropriately becomes essential for long-term survival and success. The geological features of the landscape provide landmarks for navigation, shelter during extreme weather, and clues about water sources and seasonal resource availability. Understanding the relationship between geological formations and environmental conditions allows for more sophisticated planning and decision-making that improves survival prospects and quality of life. Your personal relationship with the landscape evolves from simple survival necessity to something approaching partnership, a mutual adaptation where you learn to work with rather than against environmental conditions while developing appreciation for the austere beauty and subtle complexity of desert ecosystems. The landscape becomes familiar rather than foreign, predictable rather than mysterious, and beautiful rather than merely challenging. The long-term perspective that comes with mastering desert survival allows you to see patterns and relationships that weren't apparent during the early stages of learning. The landscape that once seemed hostile and arbitrary reveals itself to be complex but comprehensible, harsh but fair, challenging but ultimately supportive of life forms that are properly adapted to its requirements. Understanding this relationship marks the completion of your transition from struggling juvenile to competent adult, ready for the responsibilities and opportunities that come with full membership in the desert community. You've become the camel equivalent of a well-oiled machine, efficient, reliable, and slightly judgmental about the performance standards of everyone around you. The transformation from awkward juvenile to competent adult to peak performance desert survivor has reached its culmination in a version of yourself that operates with the kind of smooth efficiency that makes difficult tasks look effortless and complex decisions appear obvious. The efficiency manifests in every aspect of your daily existence. Your movement across the landscape has evolved into a form of kinetic poetry, each step precisely placed to minimize energy expenditure while maximizing forward progress. You waste no motion, no energy, no time on activities that don't contribute directly to survival or social cohesion. Your body has become a precision instrument calibrated for desert life, operating at optimal efficiency across all systems and functions. The reliability that characterizes your current phase extends beyond personal competence to encompass your role as a stabilizing force within the herd's social structure. Other animals plan their activities around your predictable excellence. They know that when you identify a water source, it will be where you said it would be. When you predict weather changes, they can adjust their preparations accordingly. When you assess threats or opportunities, your evaluation can be trusted as accurate and actionable. But with peak performance comes a certain level of judgment about the performance standards of others, particularly the younger generation, whose approach to basic survival tasks sometimes lacks the refinement and efficiency that you've achieved through years of dedicated practice. You find yourself mentally critiquing their technique, their decision-making processes, and their general approach to the challenges of desert existence. It's not malicious judgment, more like the automatic quality assessment of someone who's spent decades perfecting their craft and can't help but notice when others are doing things the hard way. Your reputation in the herd has solidified into something substantial and enduring, competent without being flashy, reliable without being boring, authoritative without being domineering. You've achieved the kind of professional recognition that comes from consistently excellent performance over extended periods, combined with the wisdom to avoid the kind of dramatic gestures that attract attention but don't necessarily improve outcomes. The competence that defines your reputation is comprehensive and multifaceted. You excel not just at individual survival skills, but at the complex coordination required for group leadership, resource management, and social navigation. Your expertise extends across all aspects of desert life, from technical skills like navigation and foraging to social competencies like conflict resolution and mentorship. You've become a general practitioner of desert survival, rather than a specialist in any particular area. The non-flashy nature of your competence represents a mature understanding that sustainable excellence comes from consistent performance rather than spectacular achievements. You've learned that the most impressive survival feats are often the ones that prevent dramatic situations from arising in the first place. Your reputation is built on the accumulation of countless small decisions made correctly, routine challenges handled efficiently, and potential problems anticipated and avoided before they become crises. The younger generation looks to you for guidance with the kind of automatic deference that suggests your authority is both recognized and respected, but the constant demand for wisdom, advice, and leadership creates a burden that's both flattering and exhausting. Being the camel that others turn to during uncertain situations means that your expertise is in constant demand, leaving little time for personal pursuits or simple rest. The flattering aspect of being sought out for guidance comes from the recognition that your knowledge and judgment are valued by animals whose own survival depends on making good decisions. Their willingness to defer to your expertise represents the highest form of professional respect. Acknowledgement that your competence is superior to their own, and that following your advice improves their prospects for success and survival. But the exhausting aspect of constant guidance requests involves the emotional and intellectual energy required to assess complex situations, formulate appropriate responses, and communicate advice in ways that are both useful and understandable to animals with varying levels of experience and competence. Every decision you make affects not just your own welfare, but the welfare of animals who've chosen to trust your judgment. The weight of that responsibility can be overwhelming, even when you're confident in your abilities. Your humps are perfectly proportioned monuments to successful resource management. Your coat gleams with health that advertises genetic fitness and environmental mastery, and your spit accuracy has achieved legendary status that makes you a formidable opponent in both competitive and defensive situations. These physical attributes represent the visible evidence of your peak performance status, external confirmation of internal excellence. The perfect proportioning of your humps represents years of successful adaptation to the feast and famine cycles that characterize desert life. They're large enough to store substantial energy reserves during abundant periods, but not so large as to create mobility problems during lean times. They're symmetrical enough to suggest genetic quality, but practical enough to function effectively as biological storage systems. They represent the ideal balance between form and function that characterizes peak evolutionary adaptation. Your gleaming coat serves multiple functions beyond simple aesthetic appeal. The lustrous quality indicates optimal nutrition and health status, suggesting that you've mastered the challenge of extracting adequate resources from a challenging environment. The coat's condition also demonstrates your competence in grooming and self-maintenance, which correlates with general life management skills and attention to detail that transfers to other areas of survival performance. The legendary spit accuracy represents the culmination of years of practice, natural ability, and competitive motivation that have transformed a basic biological function into a refined skill worthy of respect and admiration. Your reputation for accuracy serves both social and defensive functions, establishing your credibility in competitive situations while deterring potential challengers who understand that confronting you involves risking immediate and precise retaliation. Leading expeditions to distant water sources has become an exercise in confident competence that combines technical expertise with leadership skills and the kind of calm authority that inspires confidence in followers while managing the complex logistics of group travel across challenging terrain. These expeditions represent some of the most critical activities of herd life, where mistakes can have life or death consequences, and success requires integrating multiple types of knowledge and skill. The confidence that characterizes your leadership style comes from years of experience that have taught you to trust your own judgment, while remaining alert to changing conditions that might require tactical adjustments. You've led enough expeditions to understand the difference between routine challenges that can be handled through standard procedures and unusual situations that require creative problem-solving and adaptive leadership. The technical expertise required for successful water expeditions involves navigation skills that account for seasonal variations in water availability, geological knowledge that helps identify likely sources of hidden water, and understanding of group dynamics that allows you to manage the diverse needs and capabilities of expedition members. You need to balance the urgency of water acquisition with the safety requirements of traveling across potentially dangerous terrain with animals of varying experience levels. The leadership aspects of water expeditions extend beyond technical route finding to include motivation, management, conflict resolution, and decision-making under pressure. Expedition members look to you not just for navigation guidance, but for reassurance during difficult moments, conflict resolution when disagreements arise, and decisive action when circumstances require rapid response to changing conditions. Making decisions that affect the welfare of others has become a routine, but never casual responsibility that requires balancing multiple competing priorities while accepting accountability for outcomes that extend beyond personal consequences to include the well-being of animals who've chosen to trust your judgment. The decision-making process involves evaluating incomplete information, assessing risks and benefits, and choosing courses of action that optimize outcomes for the group as a whole. The complexity of group decision-making comes from the need to account for the diverse needs, capabilities, and limitations of different herd members. Decisions that might be optimal for healthy adult animals could be problematic for elderly animals, nursing mothers, or juveniles who haven't yet developed full survival competence. Your role involves finding solutions that work for everyone while avoiding the kind of compromises that reduce everyone's safety and welfare. The timing of major decisions, when to move, where to graze, how long to rest, requires understanding the intricate relationships between environmental conditions, group needs, and strategic objectives that change constantly based on weather, resource availability, and the current health and energy status of herd members. Getting the timing wrong can waste valuable resources, expose the group to unnecessary risks, or miss opportunities that won't be available again. Teaching younger camels the subtle arts of desert survival and social navigation has evolved from occasional mentorship opportunities to a systematic educational responsibility that requires patience, communication skills, and the ability to break down complex survival strategies into manageable lessons that can be absorbed and applied by animals with limited experience and varying learning styles. The teaching process involves much more than simply demonstrating techniques or providing information. Effective education requires understanding how learning happens, adapting instruction methods to match individual student needs, and creating opportunities for guided practice that build confidence while minimizing risks. You need to balance the urgency of essential skill development with the patience required for thorough understanding and competence development. The subtle arts that you teach extend beyond basic survival techniques to include the complex social skills required for successful integration into herd society. Young camels need to learn not just how to find water and food, but how to navigate social hierarchies, resolve conflicts diplomatically, and contribute to group welfare while advancing their own interests. These social competencies are often more difficult to teach than technical skills because they require emotional intelligence and cultural understanding that develops gradually through experience. The weight of being relied upon by creatures who assume you know what you're doing creates a psychological burden that accompanies the practical responsibilities of leadership. The assumption of competence means that your decisions are implemented without extensive questioning or second-guessing, which speeds up decision-making processes, but also means that mistakes have immediate and potentially serious consequences. The psychological pressure of constant reliance comes from understanding that other animals have subordinated their own judgment to yours, trusting that your expertise is superior to their own, and that following your guidance improves their survival prospects. This trust is both an honor and a burden, recognition of your competence that comes with the responsibility of living up to expectations that may exceed your actual capabilities in challenging situations. You can predict weather patterns with the accuracy of a meteorologist who's been personally involved in data collection for decades and whose professional reputation depends on forecasting accuracy. Your understanding of seasonal patterns, atmospheric indicators, and environmental cues has evolved into a sophisticated prediction system that rivals modern technology in its reliability and exceeds it in its integration with practical survival planning. The prediction skills combine multiple information sources into coherent forecasts that account for both large-scale weather systems and local microclimate variations. You can read cloud formations, wind patterns, atmospheric pressure changes, humidity variations, and temperature fluctuations as components of a complex system that follows predictable patterns, while remaining sensitive to subtle variations that can significantly affect local conditions. Your weather prediction abilities extend beyond simple short-term forecasting to include understanding of seasonal cycles, multi-year climate patterns, and the relationships between various environmental factors that affect resource availability, travel conditions, and survival challenges. This comprehensive understanding allows for strategic planning that accounts for both immediate conditions and longer-term environmental trends. Your body clock has synchronized with the rhythms of the desert to a degree that makes you a living instrument for measuring time, seasonal changes, and optimal timing for various activities. Your internal chronometer operates with precision that accounts for daily temperature cycles, seasonal variations in daylight hours, and annual patterns of resource availability that govern the timing of migration, feeding, and reproductive activities. The synchronization process involves biological adaptations that align your metabolic processes, activity patterns, and behavioral cycles with environmental rhythms that have remained consistent for thousands of years. Your body anticipates seasonal changes before they become obvious through external indicators, allowing for advanced preparation that improves survival prospects and quality of life. The practical applications of perfect seasonal timing include knowing exactly when to begin migrations before environmental conditions become challenging, when to modify feeding strategies to account for changing plant availability, and when to adjust activity levels to optimize energy conservation during harsh periods. This timing precision provides significant competitive advantages over animals whose seasonal awareness is less developed. Knowing exactly when to conserve energy and when to push forward has become an intuitive process that balances immediate needs with long-term sustainability, short-term opportunities with strategic reserves, and individual capabilities with group requirements. The energy management strategies that you've developed represent sophisticated understanding of the complex relationships between effort, resources, and outcomes in desert survival contexts. The conservation strategies involve recognizing situations where minimal effort can achieve necessary objectives, identifying activities that provide maximum benefit for energy invested, and understanding when reduced activity levels serve long-term interests better than maintaining high-performance standards. Energy conservation is never about laziness or avoidance of responsibility. It's about strategic resource management that optimizes survival prospects. The decision to push forward despite energy costs involves recognizing opportunities that justify extraordinary effort, situations where immediate action prevents larger problems, and circumstances where group welfare requires individual sacrifice of energy reserves. The judgment required for these decisions comes from experience-based understanding of the consequences of both action and inaction in various survival contexts. The deep satisfaction of being perfectly adapted to your environment represents the culmination of decades of learning, adaptation, and refinement that have brought you into harmony with one of the world's most challenging ecosystems. The satisfaction comes not from conquering the desert, but from learning to work with it so effectively that the environment becomes a partner rather than an adversary in the ongoing project of survival and thriving. The perfect adaptation involves biological, behavioral, and psychological adjustments that align your capabilities with environmental demands while maintaining the flexibility to respond to changing conditions. You've become a living demonstration of successful evolution in action, an organism so well suited to its environment that survival challenges become routine problems with reliable solutions. Managing conflicts within the herd requires diplomatic skills that would impress professional mediators, combining psychological insight, negotiation, expertise, and the kind of calm authority that can de-escalate tensions before they develop into serious confrontations that could damage relationships or disrupt group harmony. Your role as conflict manager has evolved naturally from your reputation for fairness, competence, and judgment that commands respect from all parties. The conflict management process involves understanding the underlying causes of disagreements, which often extend beyond the immediate issues that trigger confrontations, to include deeper problems related to resource competition, social status concerns, personal incompatibilities, and stress reactions to environmental challenges. Effective resolution requires addressing both surface symptoms and underlying causes to prevent recurring problems. The diplomatic approach to conflict resolution emphasizes finding solutions that allow all parties to maintain dignity while achieving acceptable outcomes. This involves creating face-saving opportunities for animals who've taken positions they can't easily abandon, identifying compromise solutions that address everyone's core concerns, and establishing agreements that reduce the likelihood of future conflicts over similar issues. The politics of resource allocation during lean times require Solomon-like wisdom that balances competing needs while maintaining group cohesion and morale during periods when everyone's survival is threatened by scarcity. The allocation decisions involve complex calculations about individual needs, group welfare, strategic reserves, and the psychological impact of perceived fairness on herd unity. The resource allocation process must account for the different requirements of animals in various life stages and conditions. Pregnant females, nursing mothers, growing juveniles, and elderly animals all have specialized needs that may differ from the general population. Allocation decisions need to be both practically effective and socially acceptable to avoid creating resentment that could undermine group cooperation. The lean times politics also involve managing expectations and maintaining hope during periods when resources are insufficient to meet everyone's preferences, but adequate to support survival if carefully managed. Your role includes communicating difficult realities while maintaining the optimism and unity that are essential for group survival during challenging periods. Mentoring relationships develop naturally with eager young camels who recognize your expertise and seek opportunities to learn from your experience. These relationships provide satisfaction and continuity, while requiring significant investments of time and energy that must be balanced against other responsibilities and personal needs. The mentoring process involves much more than simple skill transfer. It includes character development, wisdom transmission, and cultural preservation. The natural development of mentoring relationships comes from the attraction between competent adults and ambitious young animals who understand that learning from experienced teachers accelerates their own development and improves their survival prospects. The eagerness of young mentees can be both inspiring and overwhelming, requiring careful management to ensure that teaching opportunities remain productive rather than becoming burdensome obligations. The mentoring responsibilities extend beyond technical instruction to include guidance on social integration, personal development, and ethical behavior that supports community welfare. Young camels need to learn not just how to survive, but how to contribute positively to group dynamics and social stability. This character education requires patience, consistency, and the ability to model appropriate behavior rather than simply describing it. Understanding the subtle hierarchies that govern desert society requires sophisticated social intelligence that recognizes the complex relationships between formal authority, personal influence, specialized expertise, and situational leadership that determine how decisions are made and implemented within the herd's social structure. The hierarchies are dynamic and multifaceted, changing based on circumstances, individual performance, and collective needs. The subtle nature of these hierarchies means that formal positions and informal influence don't always align in obvious ways. An animal might have significant decision-making authority in certain situations, while deferring to others who possess specialized knowledge or personal relationships that provide alternative forms of power and influence. Understanding these nuances requires careful observation and social sensitivity. The governance aspects of hierarchy management involve knowing when to exercise authority, when to defer to others, when to seek consensus, and when to act independently based on specialized expertise. The goal is to create decision-making processes that utilize the best available knowledge and judgment while maintaining social cohesion and respect for legitimate authority structures. Courtship rituals have evolved beyond mere showing off to encompass sophisticated relationship-building processes that evaluate compatibility, assess reproductive potential, and establish partnership foundations that can support successful offspring development and long-term collaboration in challenging environments. The mature approach to romance balances biological imperatives with practical considerations and emotional connections. The evolution of courtship sophistication comes from understanding that successful reproduction requires more than just genetic compatibility. It demands partnership skills, shared values, complementary strengths, and the ability to cooperate effectively during the extended period of offspring dependency that characterizes camel family life. The courtship process has become an extended evaluation period that tests these various compatibility factors. The sophisticated courtship activities include collaborative problem-solving exercises that test partnership potential, extended conversations that evaluate communication compatibility, and joint activities that assess cooperation skills and shared approaches to survival challenges. These activities provide much better predictors of long-term relationship success than simple dominance displays or physical attraction. The possibility of offspring brings contemplation of genetic legacy that extends beyond simple reproduction to include consideration of the values, skills, and cultural knowledge that will be transmitted to the next generation. The decision to reproduce involves accepting responsibility for creating and nurturing new life in an environment where survival requires exceptional competence and resilience. The genetic legacy considerations involve understanding that offspring will inherit not just physical characteristics, but also behavioral tendencies, learning capabilities, and social skills that will determine their survival prospects and their potential contributions to future generations. The responsibility involves ensuring that reproduction contributes positively to the genetic pool and cultural continuity of the species. The contemplation of offspring also involves practical planning for the resource requirements, time commitments, and lifestyle modifications that successful parenting requires in desert environments. Reproduction isn't just a biological event, it's a long-term project that affects every aspect of life for several years and requires significant sacrifices of personal freedom and individual priorities. Partnership dynamics in a species where independence is highly valued require negotiating the balance between cooperation and autonomy that allows both individuals to maintain their identity and competence while building the collaborative relationship necessary for successful reproduction and offspring development. The challenge involves creating partnership without codependency. The independence valued in camel culture comes from the survival reality that individual competence is essential for desert survival. Partners need to be able to function effectively both together and separately, supporting each other while maintaining the skills and confidence necessary for independent survival if circumstances require separation or individual action. The partnership development process involves learning to coordinate activities, share resources, and make joint decisions while preserving the individual capabilities and decision-making independence that attracted the partners to each other initially. Successful partnerships enhance, rather than diminish, individual competence through skill sharing, resource pooling, and collaborative problem-solving. Balancing personal needs with family obligations becomes an ongoing negotiation that requires constant adjustment as circumstances change and family requirements evolve. The balance involves meeting individual survival and development needs while fulfilling responsibilities to offspring and partner that ensure family survival and success. The personal needs that must be maintained include physical health, skill development, social relationships, and individual interests that contribute to psychological well-being and personal growth. Neglecting these needs in favor of family obligations can ultimately harm the family by reducing the competence and resources that parents can provide to offspring. The family obligations include not just immediate care and protection, but also education, socialization, and preparation for independent survival that requires significant investments of time, energy, and resources over extended periods. The challenge involves meeting these obligations thoroughly while maintaining the individual capabilities that make effective parenting possible. Human encroachment represents a gradual but persistent alteration of familiar landscapes that challenges traditional survival strategies and requires ongoing adaptation to changing environmental conditions that don't follow natural patterns or respond to seasonal cycles. The human presence introduces artificial elements into the ecosystem that operate according to different principles than natural environmental factors. The encroachment process happens slowly enough that individual changes seem minor, but accumulates over time into significant alterations that affect water sources, migration routes, food availability, and safe resting areas. Traditional knowledge about resource locations and seasonal patterns becomes less reliable as human activities modify the environment in ways that don't correspond to historical patterns. The human modifications often create both opportunities and challenges that require careful evaluation and adaptive responses. Some human activities provide new water sources, food opportunities, or shelter possibilities that can be beneficial if accessed safely. Others create hazards, barriers, or disruptions that require route modifications and strategy adjustments to maintain survival effectiveness. Climate variations challenge even your considerable adaptability by introducing environmental changes that exceed the normal range of conditions for which traditional survival strategies were developed. The variations include temperature extremes, precipitation pattern changes, and seasonal timing shifts that require developing new approaches to familiar challenges. The climate challenges test the limits of biological and behavioral adaptations that have been refined over thousands of years of evolutionary development. Some variations can be accommodated through minor adjustments to existing strategies, while others require fundamental changes in approach that may not be fully compatible with traditional camel survival methods. The adaptability that has served you well in normal environmental variations must be extended and refined to handle conditions that fall outside previous experience. This requires combining traditional knowledge with innovative problem-solving that develops new strategies while maintaining the core principles that make desert survival possible. The gradual shift from following established patterns to creating new ones marks a transition from conservation of traditional wisdom to innovation that contributes to the ongoing evolution of camel culture and survival strategies. This shift represents both opportunity and responsibility. Opportunity to improve survival methods, responsibility to ensure that innovations are beneficial and sustainable. The pattern creation process involves identifying situations where traditional approaches are inadequate, developing alternative strategies through experimentation and observation, and evaluating the effectiveness of new methods over time. Innovation requires balancing respect for proven traditional wisdom with openness to improvement and adaptation. The new patterns that emerge from this innovation process may become part of the cultural knowledge that's transmitted to future generations, contributing to the ongoing adaptation that allows species survival in changing environments. The responsibility involves ensuring that innovations are truly beneficial rather than just different, and that they enhance rather than compromise long-term survival prospects. Learning that mastery includes flexibility represents a mature understanding that expertise involves not just technical competence, but also the ability to adapt that competence to changing circumstances while maintaining effectiveness and reliability. True mastery involves becoming comfortable with uncertainty and change, rather than seeking to eliminate them. The flexibility component of mastery requires maintaining openness to new information, willingness to modify proven strategies when circumstances warrant, and confidence in your ability to learn and adapt, rather than simply applying fixed knowledge. This represents a sophisticated understanding of the difference between rigid adherence to rules and intelligent application of principles. Long contemplative periods during rest stops have evolved from simple relaxation into profound meditation sessions that integrate the accumulated wisdom of your desert experience into philosophical understanding about survival, adaptation, community, and the relationship between individual existence and larger natural systems. These quiet moments provide perspective that transcends immediate survival concerns to encompass deeper questions about meaning and purpose. The contemplative periods offer opportunities to process the constant stream of survival challenges, social interactions, and environmental changes that characterize daily life in ways that extract learning and wisdom rather than just managing immediate requirements. The reflection allows for integration of experience into understanding that improves future decision-making and provides psychological satisfaction that extends beyond basic survival. The philosophical insights that emerge from contemplation include understanding about the relationships between effort and outcome, individual action, and community welfare, adaptation and tradition, and acceptance and change that provide guidance for navigating complex situations with wisdom rather than just competence. These insights contribute to the kind of deep understanding that characterizes true expertise. The satisfaction of a life lived competently in challenging circumstances provides a form of fulfillment that comes from meeting significant challenges successfully while contributing to the welfare of others and the continuation of cultural traditions. The satisfaction comes not from easy achievements, but from the accumulation of countless small victories over difficult conditions that demonstrate mastery and resilience. The competence that provides this satisfaction encompasses technical skills, social abilities, leadership capabilities, and the wisdom to apply these capabilities appropriately in complex situations. The satisfaction comes from knowing that your existence has been useful, productive, and beneficial to the community and environment that supported your development and survival. The challenging circumstances that provide the context for this satisfaction include not just environmental hardships, but also social responsibilities, ethical decisions, and the ongoing requirement to balance individual needs with community welfare. The satisfaction comes from meeting these challenges successfully while maintaining integrity and contributing positively to the continuation of life and culture. Observing younger generations provides opportunities to evaluate the success of cultural transmission, assess the adaptation of traditional wisdom to changing conditions, and experience both pride in successful mentorship and concern about declining standards or emerging challenges that threaten continuity. The observations provide perspective on the ongoing evolution of survival strategies and social patterns. The improvements that you observe in younger generations include enhanced technical skills, better adaptation to changing environmental conditions, and innovations that improve survival effectiveness and quality of life. These improvements provide satisfaction and confidence about the future continuation of camel culture and survival capabilities. The declines that concern you include loss of traditional knowledge, reduced attention to proven survival strategies, and social changes that may compromise community cohesion and mutual support systems. These concerns motivate increased attention to cultural preservation and education that ensures essential knowledge and values are transmitted effectively. The quiet pride of being a successful member of an ancient lineage encompasses both personal achievement and contribution to the continuation of genetic and cultural heritage that extends back thousands of years and will hopefully continue for thousands more. The pride comes from understanding that your existence represents a link in an unbroken chain of successful adaptation and survival that connects past and future. The ancient lineage that you represent includes not just genetic inheritance, but also cultural knowledge, survival strategies, and social systems that have been tested and refined through countless generations of desert survival. Your success demonstrates the continuing effectiveness of this inherited wisdom, while your innovations contribute to its ongoing development and improvement. The success that justifies this pride includes not just individual survival and prosperity, but also contribution to community welfare, successful cultural transmission, and the advancement of survival knowledge and social cooperation that benefits current and future generations. The pride comes from knowing that your existence has been meaningful and beneficial within the larger context of species survival and cultural continuity. Your joints begin offering weather predictions with increasing accuracy and decreasing comfort, transforming from reliable mechanical components into sophisticated meteorological instruments that unfortunately come with user-unfriendly interfaces involving stiffness, creaking, and the occasional sharp reminder that time is indeed a factor in biological systems. The transformation is so gradual that you don't notice it happening, until one morning you wake up and realize that your knees have become more accurate than any professional weather service, and considerably more pessimistic about upcoming atmospheric conditions. The accuracy of joint-based weather prediction reaches levels that would impress meteorologists if meteorologists were interested in data collection methods that involved personal discomfort and the gradual deterioration of cartilage. Your left shoulder can predict sandstorms with 48-hour advance notice. Your right hip provides early warning systems for temperature drops that allow for strategic preparation and positioning. Your spine offers comprehensive atmospheric pressure analysis that includes detailed forecasts about wind patterns, humidity changes, and the likelihood of precipitation events that might not occur for several days. But the comfort level associated with these predictions decreases in inverse proportion to their accuracy, creating a situation where your most reliable source of environmental information is also your most persistent source of physical discomfort. The stiffness that accompanies weather changes becomes a daily reminder that biological systems accumulate wear over time, regardless of how carefully they've been maintained or how efficiently they've been operated. The psychological adjustment to joint-based weather prediction involves learning to appreciate the information while managing the discomfort, finding ways to use the early warning system productively, while accepting that the data collection process involves unavoidable personal cost. It's like having a sophisticated monitoring system that requires payment in the form of gradually increasing subscription fees, charged directly to your comfort account. The pace of life undergoes a subtle but meaningful transformation from determined plodding to thoughtful meandering that reflects both physical changes and psychological evolution toward a more contemplative approach to daily activities. The change isn't about reduced capability or declining energy. It's about refined efficiency that prioritizes effectiveness over speed, wisdom over urgency, and strategic thinking over reactive responses. The determined plodding that characterized your earlier adult years involved a certain amount of brute force approach to challenges, powering through difficulties through sustained effort, maintaining high activity levels regardless of circumstances, and approaching problems with energy and persistence rather than subtle strategy. This approach worked well during your peak performance years, when your physical capabilities could support intensive effort over extended periods. The thoughtful meandering that replaces determined plodding represents a more sophisticated approach to desert survival that leverages accumulated experience and refined judgment to achieve better outcomes with less effort. You've learned to read situations more accurately, identify the most efficient solutions more quickly, and avoid unnecessary expenditure of energy on problems that can be solved through patience and strategic timing rather than immediate action. The meandering quality comes from understanding that the shortest distance between 2 points isn't always the most efficient route when you factor in terrain challenges, energy costs, resource availability, and the complex logistics of group travel. Sometimes, the best path involves apparent detours that provide better overall outcomes than direct approaches that seem more efficient, but create complications or require excessive effort. Younger camels' energy becomes both admirable and slightly irritating in ways that surprise you with their intensity and consistency. The admiration comes from recognizing the enthusiasm, optimism, and physical vitality that characterize animals who haven't yet accumulated the wear patterns and cautious wisdom that come with extended desert experience. Their energy represents hope, renewal, and the continuation of life force that ensures species survival and cultural development. The irritation, however, comes from observing the inefficiencies, unnecessary risks, and occasional disregard for proven strategies that often accompany youthful enthusiasm. You watch young camels expending enormous amounts of energy on activities that could be accomplished more efficiently, taking risks that seem unwarranted given available alternatives, and ignoring advice that could save them considerable effort and potential problems. The combination of admiration and irritation creates a complex emotional response that includes protective instincts, educational impulses, and occasional impatience, with learning processes that seem unnecessarily slow or resistant to guidance. You want to help younger animals avoid mistakes and develop competence more efficiently, but you also understand that certain types of learning require personal experience rather than just instruction. Your patience has evolved into something approaching Zen-like acceptance that transcends simple tolerance to encompass deep understanding of the rhythms, processes, and inevitable variations that characterize both individual development and group dynamics. The patience isn't passive resignation. It's active wisdom that recognizes when intervention is helpful, and when allowing natural processes to unfold produces better outcomes than attempted control or acceleration. The Zen-like quality of your patience comes from understanding that many situations resolve themselves more effectively when approached with calm observation rather than immediate action. You've learned to distinguish between problems that require urgent intervention and those that benefit from patient monitoring, between challenges that respond to direct action and those that dissolve naturally when given appropriate time and space. The acceptance component involves recognizing that individual animals develop at their own pace, according to their own learning styles and personality characteristics, that environmental challenges follow patterns that include both predictable cycles and random variations, and that attempting to control outcomes beyond your direct influence often creates more problems than it solves. The herd naturally defers to your judgment on matters of survival and navigation with the kind of automatic respect that indicates your reputation for competence has achieved institutional status within the group's social structure. The deference isn't based on fear or formal authority. It's the voluntary acknowledgement by experienced animals that your decision-making track record justifies, trusting your guidance even when they don't fully understand your reasoning or agree with your approach. The natural quality of this deference means that it happens without conscious decision-making or formal recognition ceremonies. Other animals simply begin consulting you automatically when they face difficult decisions, positioning themselves to observe your choices during challenging situations, and modifying their own behavior based on your example rather than explicit instruction. The respect has become embedded in the social fabric of the group, rather than being contingent on recent performance or current demonstrations of competence. The scope of deference extends across multiple domains of expertise, from technical skills like navigation and resource location to social competencies like conflict resolution and group coordination. Your judgment is sought not just on specialized topics where you have obvious expertise, but on general questions about timing, strategy, and approach that require the kind of integrated wisdom that comes from years of successful experience across diverse challenges. Your presence becomes a calming influence during stressful situations through some combination of demonstrated competence, emotional stability, and the kind of quiet confidence that suggests you've successfully handled similar challenges before and expect to do so again. The calming effect operates both consciously and unconsciously, helping other animals manage their anxiety while improving their ability to think clearly and respond effectively to difficulties. The conscious calming comes from explicit recognition that your experience and judgment can be relied upon to generate effective solutions to current problems. Animals who might otherwise panic or react impulsively can redirect their energy toward productive problem solving when they have confidence that leadership is competent and reliable. Your presence provides a stabilizing reference point that helps others maintain perspective during challenging circumstances. The unconscious calming operates through subtle social signals that communicate stability, confidence, and capability without explicit verbal reassurance. Your body language, movement patterns, and general demeanor broadcast information about stress levels, threat assessment, and confidence in outcomes that influences the emotional state of other animals who are naturally attuned to reading these social cues for information about appropriate responses to challenging situations. Teaching responsibilities increase as your reputation for competence spreads beyond your immediate social circle to encompass younger animals from extended family groups and even other herds who seek opportunities to learn from your experience and expertise. The increase in teaching demand reflects both the quality of your knowledge and your effectiveness as an instructor who can communicate complex information in ways that facilitate learning and practical application. The spreading reputation comes from the accumulated testimony of animals you've taught successfully, the visible evidence of your continued competence in survival challenges, and the recognition by other experienced animals that your knowledge and teaching abilities represent valuable community resources that should be utilized fully. Your expertise has achieved the kind of recognition that creates demand for instruction that exceeds your available time and energy. The teaching responsibilities involve both formal instruction during designated educational periods and informal mentorship that happens continuously through example, advice, and guidance provided during routine activities. The formal teaching includes structured lessons about specific survival skills, social protocols, and decision-making strategies. The informal mentorship involves answering questions, providing feedback, and offering guidance during real-world situations where learning opportunities arise naturally. The realization that you've become the wise elder you once found intimidating represents a profound psychological transition that involves accepting your own authority and expertise while remembering the perspective of less experienced animals who look to you for guidance. The intimidation you once felt toward elder animals helps you understand the emotional challenges that younger animals face when seeking instruction from figures they perceive as impossibly competent and knowledgeable. The transformation into an intimidating figure yourself requires learning to project appropriate authority while remaining approachable, to demonstrate competence while maintaining humility, and to provide guidance while encouraging independent thinking and confidence development. The goal is to become the kind of elder that you would have wanted to learn from, knowledgeable but patient, authoritative but approachable, wise but understanding of the learning process. Old friendships deepen into comfortable, wordless understanding that transcends the need for constant communication and explicit coordination, evolving into relationships characterized by mutual respect, shared experience, and the kind of effortless cooperation that develops between animals who've worked together successfully through multiple challenges over extended periods. These mature friendships represent some of the most satisfying relationships in your social network. The comfortable quality of these relationships comes from the accumulated trust and understanding that develops when animals consistently demonstrate reliability, competence, and good judgment in their interactions with each other. You've learned each other's communication styles, work preferences, decision-making patterns, and stress responses well enough that coordination happens naturally without extensive discussion or negotiation. The wordless understanding operates through subtle communication channels that include body language, positioning, timing, and shared attention to environmental cues that allow for complex coordination without explicit verbal exchange. These relationships have developed their own private language of glances, gestures, and positioning that communicates intentions, preferences, and assessments more efficiently than conventional social interaction protocols. In middle age, relationships shift from impulsive bonds to deep partnerships grounded in mutual respect, proven competence, and shared experience. These connections are more stable and enduring, built on realistic expectations and complementary strengths that enhance survival. Conflict is resolved through subtle cues, body language, strategic positioning, and silent understanding, preserving harmony without confrontation. As experience deepens, others begin to seek your advice. It's both flattering and weighty, a sign of respect, but also a responsibility requiring thoughtful balance, offering guidance without taking away others' agency. Wisdom, to you, feels natural, born of experience rather than superiority. This humility keeps you learning, even as you teach. Your body, too, reflects decades of adaptation. Every system, digestive, respiratory, circulatory, has become optimized for desert life. Movement has become efficient, deliberate, and automatic, conserving energy while navigating harsh terrain with practiced grace. What once required conscious effort now happens without thought survival, through elegant, unconscious mastery. Visible changes, what humans might call wisdom lines, tell the story of a life lived under sun and sand. They're not flaws but badges of survival. Coat texture shaped by wind, posture refined by burden, expressions etched by sun and effort. These adaptations are functional, enhancing your ability to thrive. Rather than resist aging, you adapt. You modify behaviors, shift strategies, and lean more on experience than strength. You teach quietly through action more than instruction, as younger camels learn not only techniques, but values, cooperation, resilience, and thoughtful leadership. There's deep satisfaction in watching those you've taught grow into capable members of the herd. Their success reflects your influence, even if they don't realize it. Your knowledge becomes part of the collective wisdom that sustains the community across generations. In these later years, you move more slowly, but no less meaningfully, each step deliberate, each moment considered. You've shifted from leader to advisor, from doer to teacher. Your pace is respected, your presence grounding. New camels stumble into life with awkward hope. The cycle continues. You've become part of a great, ongoing story proof that quiet competence, patient adaptation, and sustainable wisdom matter. There's beauty in the ordinary rhythms of desert life, a quiet dignity in thriving exactly where you're meant to be, doing exactly what you're meant to do.